Tape's rolling anytime.
Okay, it's Tuesday, April 11th, 2006, and we are here at the GAC Library with Liz McNicholl. Kevin Collins is our cameraman, and Peg O'Leary is taking notes, and I'm Hillary Correa. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Hillary.
To begin, can you tell me about your name? Why were you given your name?
My first name is Elizabeth, my full name, Elizabeth Mary Bridget Dolan McNicholl, the full name. I was given Elizabeth after my aunt who died, I think the year before I was born. My father's sister, her name was Betty. So they wanted to call me Betty, but my mother said, no, you can't call her Betty, so they went for Elizabeth. So you could abbreviate that to Betty if you wanted. So I don't think I've been asked that before.
And where were you born?
I was born in Dublin, County Dublin, in the hospital in Dublin, and I grew up in County Meath, Ireland.
And county, town, parish?
The parish was, my goodness, we belonged to two parishes, Castletown and Fletcherstown. And I grew up very much in the country in a place called Knightstown, Wilkinstown. Actually, it's like a mile away from Wilkinstown. And my local village just had the usual, one post office, one shop, one petrol station, and one little small school. And that was it. So I was I grew up in the country.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you live on a farm?
Yes, grew up on the farm, worked on the farm. Very typical farm life, yeah.
And if you were standing in the doorway of your childhood home looking out, what would you have seen?
We saw the main road between, I guess you would say, King's Court in Dublin. The main road was right outside our front door, and directly across the road from us was an entranceway into, it's called an avenue. So there was two walls and an avenue up to this mansion. And they were our neighbours whom we never really saw that much. Yeah, so.
And what was your house like?
Our house was beautiful home, very unfortunate at the time, but when looking back, I was very fortunate to have been brought up in a house that was built in the year 1691. Wow. So over 400 years old. And of course, there was no heating. There was running water in it by the time I became a youngster, but for most of my mother's early married life, there was no running water. They eventually got that in, and everything was heated by a fireplace. The water at that point was heated by a fireplace, and our home was heated primarily by 3 fireplaces.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was cold. You got out of bed in the morning, and you woke up, you could see your breath. You know the way you walk out on a frosty morning here? You see your breath. We woke up in our bedroom like that every morning. And then you'd get out of the beds, and we had a stone floor, and it would be really cold, so you'd get dressed really quickly and kind of move on with the day,
Was your kitchen really warm?
Not really. It depended. If the range was lit, which we didn't light all that often, then it heated the kitchen. We had what was called a breakfast room, which was a small little room right off the kitchen, and that fireplace was lit, in the evening hours when we got home from school, and it wasn't lit all day unless it was the weekend and it was real cold. It was lit all day, but obviously to conserve firewood and coal, not firewood because we have plenty of that, but coal, things like that. So in the evening the house was warm when you came home, and we all kind of like got on, there was 7 of us sitting in that little tiny breakfast room huddled up to the fire. And then later when we all got a little bit bigger and couldn't fit in that room anymore, we moved up to what was called our sitting room, which was our good sitting room or living room, and then we lit that fire as well. So if you moved 2 feet away from the fire, you were cold. So the house wasn't, I would never say it was warm. The walls were this thick, stone walls this thick, so yeah, very basic. nothing luxurious about it. But looking back, it was a fantastic home, you know.
Did you have electricity there?
We had electricity. From when I can remember, we had electricity, but maybe at some point we didn't. And that house was in our family the whole entire 400 years.
Wow.
Yeah, generations.
Which family?
My father's forefathers, the Callahans. My dad was Dolan, and he came from a long line of Callahans, and they left it to him.
Wow.
Yeah.
And was it whitewashed and?
No, it was stone, pure. Very thick stones. The walls were all stone, and the front of it was covered in ivy. Very fine home, big, large house, and little tiny windows. Apparently, the windows had to be really small because their taxes were driven by the size of the windows, and I later found that out that the windows were so small because they had to pay less taxes because of that.
Okay.
So yeah.
And they must have been. Were they all ripply glass and
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
A lot of them were broken many a time because we threw balls through them. So I'm sure it got updated over the years. So I'm just remembering the nice clear glass, that I broke many a time myself.
Okay. And was it a one-story house or a
two-story?
Two-story.
Two-story, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was two-story. Very fine old house that would have been a very wealthy home at one point. Back in its day when there were other smaller cottages around. It withstanded 400 years, so it was built extremely well, as you can imagine. And, they were the elite at that point, I guess, and, during those days, they didn't have the heating and they didn't have the electricity. But when my dad inherited it, he never really made that many updates over the years. Because we didn't have that much money. We were just farmers and poor farmers. So we never had the money to keep it up like some other people who are wealthy would have. They would have updated it over the years. Now my brother has the house now and he's totally renovated it and it's very modern, even larger than what it was before. But, he's got all the newer amenities that are, everybody has in every home now in Ireland, really.
How close is it to to Dublin?
We were, I want to say, an hour from Dublin when I was growing up, but now you could cut that by 15 minutes because the roads are all, super highways now. You can just they've built roads that cut through some of the towns that would have been more congested now over the last few years. So it's much quicker to get to Dublin. It's about 45 minutes, maybe even a half an hour, depending who's driving and how fast they're going.
And does your brother still farm the land?
He doesn't. He has, in some capacity, kept on the farming. He has let out some of the land to some local farmers. That means they rent it out on a yearly basis, and he gets some sort of a fee for that. And he has, I want to say, about 60 head of cattle that he rears just primarily for beef. He doesn't milk them or anything. So it's not the same running farm as it used to be. My dad had cattle that he milked. It was a small farm. I mean, the cows were there just for us, really, to get our milk and our butter and cream. And we had about, I think I want to say 3 cows, and then he had a herd of cattle that he sold over the years, And he also grew crops, barley, wheat, and potatoes for selling. All of these were for selling, and hay and straw. And we all worked to bring in all the crops, every one of us.
Wow. And with your father, did he strictly farm, or did he have other jobs?
No, that was his job.
That was his job.
Yeah, farming, full-time job, very full-time job.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And what were your parents' names?
Maura was my mum, spelled M-A, father, I-R-E, which sounds like Marie, but it's really Moira in Gaelic. And my father's name was Eamon. So my father's passed away, but my mom is still alive. So.
And what was her maiden name?
Gallagher.
Huh.
Now they would say Gallagher over here,
Right.
So it's Gallagher.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said you have 9 siblings?
Well, no, there was 7 children, and then my mum and dad, that made 9 of us. So I have 4 sisters and 2 brothers.
And would you like to share their names?
Sure. Paul, Ruth, Sandra, Mark, Orna, and Colette is the youngest. It was
Where do
me,
you
and then
fall in the birth order?
so second youngest.
Oh, you're the second youngest.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. All right. Let's see. What were your favorite places in the place where you grew up?
The area itself or the house?
Both.
Both. That's an interesting question. Oh gosh. I had a very tough life. Sorry, I'm trying to find some good places. We had in the summertime, we worked almost all the time on the farm, so we didn't get a lot of free time. But during the summer, when the hay was all brought in, we did have some free time, and of course, you had some good weather in the summer. Every now and again, we got good weather. So there was a place that I walked to with my friends, and Crop On it was called. I almost forgot the name of that. Gosh. So we walked down to the railway track, and we'd cut through the railway track, and halfway down, about a half mile down the road, down the railway track, there was a place called Crop On, and gosh, I think it's all probably dried up now over the years, but there was a little swimming hole that you could go down to on a hot day, and you'd really just wager. I mean, I couldn't swim, so, and it wasn't that deep, but you just go in and cool off, with your take your shoes off and your socks off. And if we had some money, we'd walk up to the shops, which was at the end of the railway track was the shops, and we'd go buy ourselves some, Club Orange and Mars bars or something, and come back and have a little picnic there. So that was one of my favorite places. Another place we had down the road was Motley's Wood. And it was this wood that our father used to tell us ghost stories, and it was apparently haunted. So if you went through there, if my father drove there during the dark, the evenings, he had this thing that he did. Later in life, he'd install this thing in the car that cut off the petrol. With the click of his foot, it would cut off the petrol, and he did this to deter people that might want to steal this car. Nobody in their right mind would ever want to steal this car because it was an old Woolsey that he used to paint with old cans of paint that he had in the house. And once he painted it this awful, ugly green just a green that you could never imagine. And we used to hide in it when we go into Navan, into the local town. We'd duck down if we saw any of our friends in case they might see us in this ugly car. Anyway, he installed this. He was a bit of a genius. He installed this, what would have been a car alarm, I guess, and it cut off the petrol slowly. So somebody could steal it, and a mile down the road, the petrol would cut off if he kind of got out and he, activated this security device that he put in. So, but he would stall the car through Motley's Wood, and he would turn the lights off, and he'd have the car shuddering and say, "Oh God, Motley's coming," and we'd all be shaken. I mean, we were just petrified. We really believed that there was this ghost, So that was a scary thing when we were really little, but later on, when we got braver, we would explore that wood during the day, and apparently Motley was supposedly a hat maker who went crazy, and committed suicide, and that was the whole idea of the ghost. So we used to, when we were, I suppose in our later, early teens, 11, 12, when we got really brave, we would go into the woods and start rummaging around looking for, perhaps something that he'd left there. So we still wouldn't go in it at nighttime, but during the day we were really brave. So that was, I guess, one of the nicer places that I can remember.
That's a fun story.
It is fun. And now you're making me think, I'm sure there's lots of other places I could think of that I loved.
Keep talking.
But yeah, we just rambled when we were kids a lot. And I can remember another place over near Gibbstown we'd walk for miles and we stumbled across this old ruined castle. And that would be another place where we would, get our pocket money and go and have a little picnic and just kind of climb the walls in this castle. So it was anywhere, I guess, away from home was a good place. We found little secret places that we kind of felt they were our own, We made them our own because nobody else ever showed up there. It was just us.
How magical to be
that's kind of cool. It is, yeah. Old ruined castle.
And do you know when the castle came from?
No, it's, would have had to have been the 1500s, I suppose, to be in that shape. It was completely ruined. Just, bare walls still existing here and there with, some where you could walk up steps and see windows and see out of. But, yeah, we didn't realize that it was kind of magical at the time. Looking back now, it does seem that way.
And you did have a car as a child?
Yeah, we had one car. We had one car for all 9 of us. Now, can you imagine 9 people getting into this car? I don't know how we did that. I think we just climbed on each other's knees and we, there'd be somebody sitting on my mother's knee in the front, and then we'd all just pile up on each other's knees in the back. No seatbelts,
What is a Woolsey like? I've never heard of that kind of car.
Gosh, what would a Woolsey be like? An old Morris Minor or a... Would you have had Morris Minors here? No?
Yeah, I think they had those,
just very big and bulky would be a way to describe it. Big, bulky, old car. I can't think of anything that would look like it over here.
Is it an English car?
Woolsey. I don't know. Okay. I don't know. I didn't know my cars back then. I didn't know where they came from. If you had asked me growing up, I probably would have said it's Irish.
Okay.
But I sincerely doubt that. Yeah. Okay. Maybe it came from Germany or, England. That's a good question, though. Have to find that out.
And you had pocket money to spend?
We had, we worked on the farm. I told you this, our whole lives. We worked really hard in it. And when my father got paid for some of his crops and did a little bit well, he would give us some money. And I'm talking very little amount of money. We would get, we would work for weeks and weeks and weeks picking potatoes, and you'd maybe be handed £5 at the end of it, which was probably a lot. You would think £5 was a lot, but for the amount of work that we did, and when we got up at 8 o'clock in the morning, we went out, we came home, the girls came home to cook lunch, get it ready for the lads that would come in, and we would clean up after our lunch, and we would, hurry up, get back out as quick as you can, back out to the fields. And, my brothers were the ones that sat in the tractor and trailer and drove it up and down. Were we the ones doing all the physical work, putting the potatoes in the bag, lifting them up, lifting them on the trailers when they were done. And you would go home at 6 o'clock, and if there was still daylight out, not necessarily potato season, but more the hay, it would be light till 11 o'clock at night. So you'd come home, cook dinner. Everybody would come in and cook dinner. You'd clean up after dinner, and you'd be back out to the fields until about 10 or 11 at night and come home and cook supper for everybody. So we got paid about £5 at the end of that. You would have worked weeks for it. But my brothers would have been handed like 100, really? The 2 lads, I don't know. Doesn't sound very fair, does it?
No.
So the £5 probably would have gone a long way. I can't remember getting much other pocket money than the times when the crops came in, potatoes maybe, and the hay. I think on occasion, if our aunts and uncles visited from Dublin once a year, they would hand us £2, or 50 pence or something like that. And then when I got old enough, from about 11, I was babysitting. So then I had money because, you got paid £2 for babysitting. It got a little bit more depending on, later on when we got a little older, you got paid a little bit more depending on the people that hired you. So we had this American that came back from America. He was married to an Irish woman and lived in this beautiful home. I think I was about 14 or 15. I started babysitting for them, and we got £10 when we babysat for them. So my sister and I would fight whenever they'd call, it's my turn, it's my turn. So we could get a tenner, you know. So the tenner would go a long way. You'd be able to buy a pair of jeans with that, and you know, maybe save for something else and have a little bit of pocket money for some sweets.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
And to place this in time, Liz, I forgot to ask you when you were born.
So 1967.
Okay. Okay.
So 39 years ago. Should I say that?
And you look about 20.
Thank you.
And how about your grandparents? Did you know your grandparents?
I knew my two grandmothers, that was it. Both my grandfathers had died before I was born, I believe. I never met them anyway. And my mother's father died when she was 12, so he died very young. And my other grandfather I never met, and I don't know when he died. That's pretty sad that I don't know. I don't know at what age he died in my father's life, you know. So my mother's mom, I knew her for most of my life. I think I was about 20 when she died, 20, 22 when she died. And she was very much a part of my life growing up. You know, we would always go visit her, and we would love going to her house because, you know, we got spoiled rotten for like a week every summer. We'd get up there. And then my other grandmother, she was very sick. That's all I can remember, going to visit her, and she was always in her bed when we visited her. And she died, I think, when I was about 8.
Can I ask you their names?
She was Delia Dolan, my father's mother, and my mother's mom was Laura Gallagher. Now, I don't know what their maiden names were. So.
And were they both from Meath?
Dublin.
Oh, from Dublin.
From Dublin, yeah. My mother's mum was from Dublin her whole life. They lived in Dublin their whole life. And yeah, my father's mum was from Dublin as well. I know there was some history along the way with Athlone. Some of his family members lived in Athlone. And connections over there in Galway as well, I think. So, yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. Who's the oldest person you can remember in your family? Would it have been one of your grandparents?
I had an older aunt who lived in Athlone, who was 101. I visited her when she was 101. She was blind. She'd been blinded by the black and tans. And I remember on my one and only visit to Galway when I was 11, stopping off to visit her. So she's the oldest one that was pretty old. So I don't think you can beat that.
She was blinded by the.
She was blinded by the black and tans.
What happened?
I don't know. That's all I know. I just you know, it's funny growing up in Ireland. We lived in the south, and the Troubles, although it was on the news every day, it's kind of sad to say this now because I'm married to a fella from the north of Ireland. I know you're going to get around to this eventually. So you know, we lived about an hour, I'd say, away from the north of Ireland, but we were so removed from that when I was growing up. You just heard about, a bomb went off today in Belfast or in England, and the IRA claimed it. But as far as been connected with that history of, you know, the Troubles, we were really not absorbed in that in our daily lives. You know, we just had a very normal life in a way when you think about it, because we lived freely. You know, there was no bombings going on around us, and no army men walking the streets. So I guess, you know, when I was 11 and I met this woman that was 101, and I heard about the black and tans, it just seemed like that was a million miles away from me and a million years away from me. But it's not until later, when you get older and of course living here, I think we're more connected now to our heritage and the Troubles in the north of Ireland, you know, than when I was growing up. And I want to say that everybody around me at that age and that time was of the same frame of mind about that. You know, it was not in our doorstep, so that's pretty sad. It really was in our doorstep. It was only an hour away, but we had a very, you know, free life when you think about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like two different worlds.
Two completely different worlds. You know, I only saw that later when I met my husband. Completely different. So now, of course, now I'm curious about my aunt. I'm more curious about that now that you brought it up.
Yeah, it just sounds like a very,
Yeah,
interesting
yeah.
thing.
She was living in those times when it was, you know, it wasn't just in the north. There was fighting going on all over Ireland, and so, you know, she lived in those times. I mean, there was fighting done on our land. Apparently, Croppy Hill is one of the fields that my father owned, and all the fields that we had a name. And Croppy Hill was one of them, and the Croppy boys actually fought on our land, and they found artifacts later on, and many things. You know, the historians came and looked at our property and looked at the fields and dug up stuff that was from that time.
Do you know what kinds of things they found?
You know, obviously bullets and maybe pieces of jewelry that people may have worn, things like that. I mean, our house was filled with things that were years and years old, and the museum in Dublin came many times to ask my father, would you be willing to sell this or that? And he never wanted to sell anything because he felt it was part of the house, you know. And unfortunately, later when he died, my parents separated, and he was living in the house on his own. So when he died, there was nobody there, and people came in and stole a lot of things out of the house. I mean, grandfather clock, fantastic things that were there for hundreds of years, and they were all stolen. So it was such a shame, you know.
Wow.
Such a shame that it didn't get preserved somewhere, you know.
Can you tell me the names of some of your fields? I mean, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, if I can remember now. Let's see. We had Croppy Hill. We had the sand field. I guess something related to it being sandy at some point. I don't know why. Carpenters, which was a family name along the way. There was carpenters in our family as well. We had what was called the end field and the back field. So they were just because of their positioning on the property. And, oh gosh, I can't believe this. I'm going to go home now and start digging up the other names. I can't think of any more at the moment. Maybe they'll come to me later.
And how about some of the objects in the house that were
really old?
Yes.
China. We had really, really old china. We had those, you know, old-fashioned basins. You still see them around, the basin with the jug that people would bathe themselves with. We had you know, many of those. Some of them had cracks in them, really, really old. We had fantastic paraffin oil lamps that were, we had about 5 of them. And quite often in Ireland back then, I don't know if it's still the same, the electricity board, the ESB they were called, went on strike very regularly. And I mean, for days they would go on strike, so you'd have no electricity, but we had the paraffin oil lamps. So we'd fill them up with paraffin, and we were able to light the whole house up with these lights. And I can remember we'd get home when I was in my teens. I went to a school in Navan, and we'd get home at 7 o'clock at night because we took the late bus home. And I can remember we'd pull up on the buses, and people would say, how come you have electricity? Everywhere else was in darkness, and our house was all lit up with these paraffin oil lamps. And people would say, how come you guys have electricity? And it was just because we had these fantastic old lamps.
And they were bright.
They were really bright. You could turn them up or dim them. I mean, you've seen them in movies, really old movies. You know, the cowboy movies, you'd even see them where they turn them down. I don't know if they used paraffin oil or if they used some other you know, I don't know what they put them in over here, but we called it paraffin oil.
What does paraffin oil smell like?
It smells like, oh want to say petrol, but not quite. I can smell it now.
Is it like kerosene?
Kerosene. That's probably what it is, kerosene oil. It's probably the name we had for it. So you could dim them or brighten them as much as you want. And because we had so many of them, we were able to light so many rooms with them, you know. So they were still there up until I left. And I don't know if they were all stolen. I think my brother might still have a few of those. We had some really old jewelry that were still lying around. Some of our furniture was ancient. I mean, ancient. A lot of it had broken over the years through wear and tear, and my father would get them reupholstered over the years too. So some of them are, I can still remember the designs of them, old carving chairs. We had old paintings. Yeah, great old furniture. Great old, just all the, I mean, as I said earlier, we didn't have a lot of money, so we used all this furniture for years and years and years. When other people upgraded to more comfy things, we were still stuck in the Stone Age, really.